So was this type of strategy behind your blog, Unqualified Reservations? Were you thinking about these things proactively when you first set out to do that blog?
No, I was crazy. I should never have written anything at all.
Do you mean that? You don't mean that.
There's part of me that means that, but there's part of me that doesn't. When I think about the problem of being a dissident, I'm always reminded. Do you know the writer Ryszard Kapuscinski?
I don't.
He wrote mainly in the 80s and 90s. I think he died in the early 2000s. He was a journalist, and he was a correspondent for the official Polish communist news agency. Fortunately for him, he was also an amazing writer, and he got sent to Africa. So Africa is kind of relatively tangentially related to Polish communism. So he could not really exactly write whatever he wanted, but he could write stuff that was actually worthwhile content. There's some controversy over whether there's any actual truth in his books or whether they're just wholly made up. But even if they're wholly made up, they're pretty good. And so he wrote this one book called The Emperor, which is about Ethiopia. And so he went to Ethiopia, and everyone here has heard of Haile Selassie, right? You know, like from Bob Marley songs or something. So Haile Selassie was this emperor of Ethiopia, and he was kind of a nutcase. He had pet lions. He used to feed dissidents to the lions. It was a little weird. So eventually it was sort of weird enough, and what we now call civil society, got started to kind of organize against him, and he was overthrown. The same thing happens. It always happens. He was overthrown by the liberals, and then the liberals got stabbed in the back by the committed Marxist-Leninists, and they established this regime called the Derg, which was about 100 times worse than Haile Selassie ever was. But so in the early days of the Derg, Ryszard Kapuscinski, this Polish journalist, goes to Ethiopia. And he interviews all kinds of people who were basically part of the old regime. Ethiopia, as you may or may not know, is in some ways more of a Middle Eastern country than an African country. And it's a Christian country. It has this very old nobility and this very old elite. And so these people were, the former employees of Haile Selassie. So there's this one interview from this book, or maybe completely fake interview, I don't really know, that sticks in my mind, where he goes and interviews a couple who are part of this old this government service class, who have basically had a son who has become a dissident and subsequently comes to, of course, a very bad end. And he's interviewing this couple, and he's like, tell me when you first suspected that there might be a problem. And, the wife was like, well, one day my husband came to me and he was like, we have a problem. What is the problem? The problem is Tesfaye, their son, Tesfaye has started to think. And as a parent, I really relate to that, in a way, like, anyone who is interested in actually getting ahead or succeeding in this world would be very well advised not to think. And if they start thinking, they should, and I'm serious about this, they should keep it to themselves. They should hide, there's a great term, hide your power level. Hide your power level. By all means, if you start thinking, don't be like a 15-year-old Ethiopian boy who's going to end up being shot in a month and a half. So, that's, I think, certainly, is a valid perspective. On the other hand, what was this line of Shaw? A reasonable person adapts himself to society. And an unreasonable person insists on adapting the world to himself. Therefore, all progress depends on unreasonable people.
And what about people who are cursed with this drive or this necessity to think, despite the odds?
There's a great line. There's another writer I really adore, which is the writer Freda Utley. So she was writing in the 30s and 40s, and she was a communist. She was a communist in the 30s. In the 30s, basically anyone who was smart or cool was a communist. The list of smart, cool people who were not communists is an interesting list. Otherwise, they were a communist. So Ellie was a communist, and she was so committed to the cause that she went and married a Russian, a bright young Russian guy who was, part of the revolution, and actually moves to Russia with him. She moves to Russia with him, and then in the mid-30s, then shit goes bad. He disappears into the gulag. She never hears from him again. and she has like a baby son. So she comes back to the US, and she has all these chic friends, right? Because communism has always been this very, very chic movement. And she's like, friends, help me. Like, because the Soviet Union really cares about its friends abroad. Sorry. And, you know, of course, her friends are just like, do I know you? Do I know this person? Who is this anti-Soviet person who's knocking on my door? They're like, fuck you. And so, you know, of course, she gets nowhere with this, right? Sorry. And, you know, she goes and talks to her friend, Edith Hamilton. You know, Edith Hamilton, the great writer on mythology, great 30s writer. She talks to Edith Hamilton, and she's like, why are all my friends, like, stabbing me in the back? And Edith Hamilton is like, well, you know, you really shouldn't expect the material rewards of success to come along with the spiritual rewards of telling the truth. You shouldn't expect that. And I think that's true today, and you've experienced that, right, Justin? I'll let you talk for a second.